Hey guys, my name is Andrew, watching Talk League Gaming, and today, at long last, we finally get to the October 2020 Pioneer tier list. So, unfortunately, I wanted to make this at the beginning of October 1st, but with Zendikar Rising just releasing, I wanted to give it a little bit more time for the meta to develop to give you a better idea of what is good and what is not so great in the Pioneer formats. And yeah, let's go ahead and get into the video. Okay, so as you can see, I have tier 1, 2, 3, and everything else. Tier 1 being the top of the tier, and the everything else being kind of the things that you may see, but are really kind of out of the meta. With that said, let's start with what I think is the most important deck to watch out for in the meta, and that is, unfortunately, Omnath. In Pioneer, it is very, very powerful. As you know, and I'm pretty sure everyone who's watching this video knows, Omnath is the best deck in Standard and one of the best decks in Pioneer. Now, I will say that I called Omnath a tier 0 deck when it comes to Standard, meaning that it is a deck that only really loses to itself and versions of itself on a regular basis, of course. There are decks like Rogues that can definitely stand a chance, but a really 4-color Omnath stood well above everything else. Like, here's, you know, Omnath, and there's a big gap, and then all the other decks. So here, we don't have that story as much. There's a lot better ways to deal with Omnath, and we're going to talk about it as we're moving around, but this is the deck that everyone needs to be watching out for. It is the most powerful. It is with powerful synergies, and remember, Uro is legal in Pioneer. So all the Uro shenanigans you were doing with Omnath in Standard before Uro was banned in Standard is legal in Pioneer. So with that, with Lotus Cobra, you've got so many abilities to be able to get the triggers off with Omnath and just take over the game, going over the head of a lot of these other decks. So definitely this is the deck to play around. This is the deck to watch out for, and yeah, that's why I have it at number 1 on the tier 1. So the next deck I want to talk about is going to be this deck right here. So this is called Oops All Spells, and I'm going to put this in everything else. Now, I know a lot of people who like this deck are probably not going to be happy with me putting it here, but this Oops All Spells deck is, for those who don't know, is a deck with no lands. It is completely comprised of spells, and the idea is that you play the whatever this guy's called, the vampire, and what his ability does is when he enters the battlefield, target player looks at the top card of their library until they hit a land, and you choose one of them and put the rest in your graveyard. So the idea is you put your make your deck with no lands, and you play Bellatrix Spy. I believe that's what its name is. You go through the entire deck, and when you reveal no lands, you put all of them into your graveyard, but you have 2 World Spine Worms, which, when it enters the graveyard, will trigger and put itself back on the top of your deck, giving you 2 extra draws. Now, what are you going to hit out of your deck going into the graveyard? What you're going to hit is between 3 and, if you're lucky, even 4 Creeping Gels, which, because you'll gain life, will trigger Silver Smoke Ghoul. And when those Silver Smoke Ghouls enter the battlefield at the beginning of the end step, on the next end step, most likely your opponent's end step, you will get all of your prize amalgams. And on your next turn, you will have dealt at least 9 to 12 damage, and then have a board full of creatures that you can usually have one swing and win the game. Now, the reason why I don't think that strategy is as good in Pioneer as it is in Modern is because Modern has a lot of fast mana. They have Manamorphose. They have, Seeming Spirit Guides. You have Pentad Prisms to fix your mana. And in Pioneer, even though it is a slower format, and you would think one of these linear decks would work better, I mean, just a gentle breeze ruins your day. Like, if you get double Thought Seized, I mean, they could take both of your lands in your room. Because remember, I want you to remember this. Thought Seize when you're looking at their hand, the lands that are in their hand, the double face lands, they are in the hand spells, so they can be thought seized away. So really, if they don't have a Belcher Spy, you can just take their lands and then put them so far behind. Even if they draw a spy, they're just so far behind. It's really, really hard to get back into the game. So honestly, with a deck like this, as glass cannon as it is, you need to be fast. And I don't think it's fast enough in Pioneer to really have some competitive success. So with that said, that's why I have it in everything else. So moving on here, we have 5-color Niv Mizzet, and I'm going to put this at tier 1. I think it's the best fair deck to go against Omnath. It does some very similar things where you're trying to go over the top by playing 5-color Niv Mizzet and the Bring to Light, and the idea is to play Bring to Light, and then get your Niv Mizzet, play it, draw a new hand, and just take over the game with the sheer amount of card advantage that you have. It's a great mid-range strategy. And it also has the extra ability to have a bunch of silver bullets already in the main deck to really help you out. And since you're playing 5 colors, you have access to very powerful, very top tier, top shelf removal and counter spells and different kinds of cards that other decks aren't able to have. So, and of course, as I said before, in other videos, the main problem with Niv to Light is the speed. Sometimes you get slow starts and you just lose to things like mono red. You lose to mono black aggro, and so that's really going to be bad, especially when you're trying to, try to get your board state established without trying to be run over. And if you can get around that hurdle, and I think with Omnath being the main threat of the format, I think Niv Mizzet is probably one of the best decks to try and adapt to that. Since you are playing 5 colors, you can play a bunch of spells that make it very difficult for Omnath to play. So I think this is probably the best fair deck to go against Omnath. So with that said, that's why I have Niv Mizzet and tier 1. So the next deck we're going to be talking about is going to be auras. So I'm going to put auras right here at tier 3. So the thing is, a lot of people are on auras right now, and I think it's mostly a little bit too hyped. Auras, for those who don't know, is a mono white that splashes black or green sometimes for either Glint Sleeve Scout or Hateful Eidolon. And the idea of the deck is to play this Boggle style of deck where you're trying to get value by playing, you're constantly playing enchantments on these creatures that grow tall, and you play Loris in your sideboard as your companion to be able to play that, recur your resources, and then win the game. It was really, really powerful when in the original unerrata, Loris was the top tier of the format, but honestly, I think this is only hyped because when we get new metas, aggro decks like this become very powerful because people aren't sideboarding correctly. They're not sideboarding correctly because they don't know what the meta is, so they can't sideboard correctly for everything. It's kind of like the burn thing, where when we get a new meta, burn goes up in popularity because people don't have their burn cards in their sideboard. They're more focused on everything else and the new cards that are coming out. So I would put this at tier 3 because I think at the very least it's consistently a tier 3 deck. It can definitely be better than that. That's why I have it on the top end. If this could be 2.5, it probably would be. But I think that at the very least you can count on this being tier 3. And let me tell you, if you want a budget deck, this is the budget deck, I think. There are some decks that may be a little bit better, that if you had a little bit more of a budget, you could definitely fit in a better deck. But for the price, it's honestly not bad. So I really like this deck. And the next one we're going to be talking about is going to be Mono Black Aggro. And I'm going to put Mono Black Aggro right here in tier 1. Now, why do I have Mono Black in tier 1? And that is because of one word: consistency. I have all of the aggro decks that can try and race against Omnath, Niv Mizzet, and the other top tier decks. I think that Mono Black is the best way to attack these decks. They have Thoughtseize to disrupt them and slow them down. They have creatures like Knight of the Ebon Legion that get bigger and bigger. You have recursive elements with Bloodsoaked Champion and other cards that can recur itself from the graveyard. On top of all that, you have this clock with like Rankle, Master of Pranks, and other cards that can consistently put on pressure while also keeping them from developing the board state to get to that end game. Now, I will say the biggest weakness is that later on in the game, which usually mono black is better because of that late game, these new decks like Omnath and Nimizit are going to just completely dump on you. Like, they are going to completely dumpster you, because later in the game, they're going to cast their Niv-Mizzet. They're going to play 3 lands in one turn, get triple triggers on Omnath, and completely take over the game. So, that is the one weakness, but honestly, with these mono black aggro decks, you're not going to want to get to that late game. You're going to want to probably kill them in the mid game at the latest. So, with that said, you guys know mono black aggro. We've talked about it a million times on the channel, and honestly, I love this deck. I really do, and it's one of my favorites. And most of the time when it comes to a tournament, this is the kind of deck that I want to play because it's straightforward and it does its job. It's very reliable, and one more thing, remember, consistency. This deck is one of the best Thoughtseize decks in the entire format. So definitely watch out, and remember to about the aggro matchup. If you're playing any of these other decks, remember, mono black aggro is the most popular out of all of them. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And that is why I have it at tier 1. Alright, and the next deck we're going to be talking about is going to be Wilderness Reclamation. Teamer Reclamation to be exact. This is very similar to the banned Teamer Reclamation style deck that we saw before, playing Shark Typhoon, and trying to not only disrupt their board by being able to untap your lands and play big powerful spells, but on top of that, you can Expansion Explosion just like you did in Standard and hit him for 1 million damage to the face, and if that doesn't kill him, you're gonna draw like 8 cards. So if the damage doesn't win, your card Avenge is gonna win. You're gonna play giant, huge sharks on your end step or their end step, while also keeping up counter spells. And I just think that out of all of the kind of mana doubling decks that we have in the format right now, this is probably my favorite one. Now there is one other one that I will say is very close, but not quite to the standard of Wilderness Reclamation. So with that said, that is why I have it in tier 1, and I just want to say, while we're rounding out tier 1, these 4 decks right here are the ones you want to watch out for. They may not be the most popular, but in my opinion, that they have the best mix of popularity and power level. You want to have your disenchants. You want to have your aggro cards, like cheap removal. Fatal pushes and stuff like that. You want to have your Thoughtseizes. You want to have your going late cards for decks like Niv-Mizzet. You want these. You want to have your sideboard really tailored for tier 1 and a little bit for the lower end, but mainly that top tier 1. All right. So with that said, these 4 are definitely going to be making up tier 1. So with that said, let's kind of rewind and go down towards the everything else, and what is my opinion is going to round out the everything else section, which is going to be spirits. Now, I know a lot of people like spirits. I do too. But honestly, Lofty Denial in this meta is not very good, and if Lofty Denial is not very good and Spell Queller is not very good, the deck's not very good. I hate to break it to you. If you're going to play an aggro strategy, play mono black aggro. It's just a better version of spirits right now. You cannot keep your your spells up and try to kill them as fast as possible at the same time at any better rate than a lot of these other decks are. I'd rather play auras than spirits right now, because though Lofty Now is a very powerful card, a lot of these decks don't mind leaving their mana open, and they don't mind playing the long game. And spirits in a lot of matchups want to kind of do that. They want to play on that end step. They want to leave their mana open. If you're trying to play, you know, if you're trying to play a Rattle Chains and then start playing on their end step, trying to put them Lords in, that is just not going to work against some of these decks. So, I'm not big on Spirits because I think the two most important cards, which is Lofty Denial and Spell Queller. Spell Queller right now is just not the best in the format right now. So that's why I have it in the everything else. But remember this. This deck, unlike what I think Oops All Spells will be, I think this deck has the potential to go back to tier 2 where I once thought it was. So definitely watch out for it. Alright, and the next deck we're going to be talking about is going to be Jeskai Luca. Do you remember that one? I mean, we're just talking about a bunch of banned standard decks today. So, Jeskai Luca, for those who don't know, Jeskai Luca is a Fire's Invention deck that tries to get a token onto the battlefield, sacrifice that token, or you can also play Yorion and sacrifice that, and get a the human Agent of Treachery. Try to get Agent of Treachery onto the battlefield and start taking your opponent's lands, drawing a billion cards, and just going completely over the top of what your opponent does. This deck also plays kind of a fair kind of Jeskai control strategy with a bunch of Planeswalkers and a bunch of card advantage. It's really fun, really good deck, and completely overpowered and standard. Now, why do I have this in tier 2? And I think it's because the mana doubling kind of, you know, deck that's trying to, you know, unfairly use your mana doubling to win the game. I think Omnath and Temur Reclamation are just a better version of that strategy. If you're wanting to play that big mana, you know, Planeswalker-y kind of game, that is the best deck right now. And honestly, I don't really know what to say. Do you really care if you're playing Omnath? Do you really care about Agent of Treachery stealing one of your lands? I mean, do you really? Even if you blink it 2 or 3 times, I mean, I'm sure on the next turn you're going to play like 6 more lands and then completely blow up their board, gain a billion life, and then, like, you know, cast an ultimatum, and then just win the game off the top of that. Put like 10 permanents into play. So, really, what I'm trying to say here with Jeskai Luca is, if you're gonna play an unfair, you know, trying to like combo strategy in a fair Jeskai 3-color, 4-color, you know, shell, there are just decks that are doing what it's trying to do, but better. And I think Omnath and Temur Reclamation are just a better version of that. Now, that doesn't mean that's always going to be that way. If Omnath gets hit, if Temur Reclamation gets hit, definitely this goes way up. And maybe even just an Omnath hit might put Jeskai Luca up, because in my opinion, that Jeskai matchup is not too hard for Omnath, and it's trying to do the same thing, but like I said, at a better rate. You got Lotus Cobra, you got a bunch of other stuff going for it, and that splash for green is just really good for Omnath versus the Jeskai color. So with that said, that's why I have Jeskai Luca in tier 2. And the next deck we're going to be doing is Naya Winota. So what is Naya Winota? Naya Winota is a deck that we've seen in the past before. The idea is to try and get Winota triggers by playing a bunch of, you know, low-powered, non-human tokens, like ones that you might get off a Legion Legion Loyalist might be, Legion War Boss. I'm an idiot. Legion War Boss. I can't get my cards right today. But off of Legion War Boss, constantly attacking your opponent, getting a bunch of triggers, putting those big creatures like your Kenriths onto the battlefield and just winning the game. Kind of the same story when it comes to Jeskai Luca. You're trying to do this unfair fair strategy, trying to cheat things into play, but honestly, Omnath, you know, and these other decks are doing what you're doing, but just faster. The one problem I have with Winota, and this is why I don't particularly like it, is that it just seems slow sometimes. If you don't have your perfect draws, it just feels so underpowered, so slow. Its fair game is just not very good, and the only reason I have it in tier 2, why I wouldn't have it in like tier 3, is because of its popularity. A lot of people like this deck. I don't get it necessarily, but you know what? You gotta watch out for it, and it's in tier 2 because of the popularity. And honestly, if a lot of people are playing it, you need to be watching out for it. And that bumps it up just a little bit more than maybe I would want to as far as power level. Though I don't think this deck needs to necessarily be sideboarded too much in its in your sights, but I definitely think that because it is getting a lot of play, that you at the very least need to know what this deck does. So with that said, that's why I have it in tier 2. And the next step we're going to be talking about is going to be Rakdos Pyromancer, and I'm going to put it right here in tier 2. So I really like this deck. So Rakdos Pyromancer is a Lotus deck. They're trying to grind out advantage by playing a bunch of spells, making Pyromancer tokens. We all know the song, same song and dance and all that. The difference is this time is they're playing stuff like Blood Chief's Thirst, Cling to Dust. You're playing your Forethought Seizes. You're playing some Village Rites. So when you make a token, you can Village Rites, sacrifice it, draw 2 cards. One thing I really like is the Claim to Fame, because let's be real. Honestly, you're gonna get your Pyromancer blown up a lot. So being able to Claim to Fame it back onto the battlefield is really powerful. And it helps you a lot. You got some Stitch Suppliers, Dread Horde Arcanist, some Croxas. I really like the interaction with Croxa. You're going to be dumping a lot of cards into your graveyard and constantly trying to reoccur those resources the best you can. And the best way to do that is by escaping Croxa over and over again. You're already going to be thought seizing them and then making this discard and lose life. And on top of that, also being able to pressure your opponent with all those tokens you've been making, with all those spells that you've been putting into the graveyard after casting them. I mean, it's just a recipe for victory, and I really like it. However, the only thing I have against it is that if you don't have the Pyromancer into a lot of removal, into a lot of disruption, which sometimes when I played the deck, I feel like you draw the right half and don't with the other half sometimes, and it just doesn't work out very well. It is playing Lotus, so you do have that going for you, but I think a post-errated Lotus is much worse than pre-errated. So definitely something to think about, and definitely something you need to be prepared for, because this deck has some of the best removal in the format. So Rakdos Pyromancer, I have it in tier 2 for those reasons. The next deck we're going to be talking about is going to be Lotus Combo. And I'm going to have it right here. Lotus Combo. Look, I hate to break it to all you combo players. Honestly, this deck is not very good. And the reason why is because Underworld Breach is banned. I know you don't want to give up this deck, but this deck is just not very good. If you play anything that stops the Storm style deck, like your Damping Spheres, I mean, this deck just falls apart. People like to play it. There's a lot of players that still are on this deck, but honestly, put 4 Damping Spheres in your sideboard. You will never lose to this deck. All right. Now, of course, don't put it into any deck. I mean, if you're playing a Visit, you have better options, but just put 4 Damping Spheres. If you don't know how to play against it, put those in the deck, and they can't win. Simple as that. And that's why I have it in everything else. Moving on, we have another cool deck that I really like, and that is going to be Dimir Control. And I'm going to put it right at the end of tier 2. So why I have it kind of lower than most people would want it is because Dimir Control, and I'm also putting Esper Control kind of in this area, because I think the blue-black, white version of Control is the best version right now. The reason why is because of Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is really important in the meta right now. Having those Planeswalkers, having your Narsets, having your Teferis are very important in this meta right now. And I don't think counterspells are really the way to go. I think a lot of these enchantments and using Yorion to blink those enchantments to consistently use your removal in your ways of trying to play around their threats is much better than trying to, play a land, go, the draw, go kind of blue-white strategy, which I don't think is as good right now. But the control decks are definitely playable, but I'm just being real with you. You're gonna have a hard time. You really need to make sure that you have your Essence Scatter. I would run at least 3 to 4 Essence Scatter, probably like 3 and 1 in the sideboard, because of how prevalent Omnath and Niv Mizzet are gonna be. And countering those Niv Mizzets, countering those Omnaths are gonna be really, really important. And they actually all come in really well in other formats, or like other matchups, like countering a winota that gets played is really, really good. I mean, countering a spy when they come up is really, really good, you know. So I really like the Dimir control deck, and the only real thing against it, I guess I would say, is that you would think that it would have the best late game out of all the decks, but sometimes just the Omnath and Niv Mizzet decks and these Temur Reclamation decks just have a better late game than you do. And though you got some Planeswalkers, I mean, they get answered pretty easy with the Ultimatum. So that's why I have it in tier 2, and honestly, until Omnath goes out, I don't see this going any higher than it is right now. And the last deck we're going to be talking about today is going to be Gruul Aggro, and I'm going to put this right here in tier 3. Now look, I love me some Gruul Aggro. I think it's a really fun deck. I think it's very powerful. And you know, playing your questing beast, you know, your love struck beasts, you know, these big powerful creatures are really fun. You know, smacking your opponent with a stompy kind of green strategy, with a little bit of red to try and make it faster. I really like it, and your Ember Cleaves are important. You know, they're definitely something that it's going to make your opponent want to have removal for, but you're just not fast enough. Honestly, if I was playing aggro, just play Mono Black. Mono Black is much more consistent. You know, you're not reliant on a card like Embercleave to win the game. And honestly, yeah, that Thoughtseize Disruption is just so powerful and so good. You know, putting your opponent off the tempo is just really important. You know, well, I understand that Thoughtseize can be you know, tempo negative, but putting your opponent off of an Omnath on turn 1, or sorry, a Lotus Cover on turn 1, delaying that Omnath is super important when you're playing an aggro strategy. And these Gruul decks are gonna have to just hope that they're big enough to play through them, and I don't think that's the way you want to play it. I think if you're going to be going against these strategies, you need to be disruptive and you need to be very fast, and I don't think it's fast enough, and definitely they lack in disruption, which makes a huge weakness for them. So that's why I have it in tier 3. And with that, that's gonna wrap up my tier list for Pioneer. Honestly, though, I really wish Omnath would just go away. Just go away, please. Honestly, everything else I like. I'm really enjoying Pioneer. Besides the Omnath thing, you know, I think you know, Pioneer's in a good place. I think it's really fun. And though the top tier decks can get a little stale after a while, you know what? If we're gonna all fight against Omnath together, I think that's fine. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, so you can let me know, do you like these tier lists? What should I change? What you know, is there a way that I can make it better? Any way that you can help out the channel is so appreciated by me, really. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Today's video was brought to you by Mana Traders. Want to keep up with the meta without spending hundreds of dollars on decks? Head on down to Mana Traders and sign up for a rental account, and if you use our affiliate link, you can support the channel as well. So thank you so much for watching the video, and thank you to manatraders.com.